Dust rising across the Central Asian steppe as a lone rider approaches the assembled warriors of the Mongol Empire. But here's the twist that's about to blow everyone's mind. This isn't just another soldier, this is a woman, a princess. And she's about to challenge the greatest wrestlers in the empire to single combat, with her hand in marriage as the prize. Now, before you think this is some romantic tale, here's what nobody knows yet. She's already demolished hundreds of men in combat, and every single one of them paid her 10 horses for the privilege of getting destroyed. Her name? Khutulun. And by the time this story ends, she'll command 40,000 soldiers, reshape the entire political landscape of Asia, and become so legendary that her tale will echo 700 years into the future, inspiring one of the world's most famous operas. This is the story history tried to bury. The year is 1260, and across the endless grasslands of Central Asia, the Mongol Empire stretches from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Europe, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Into this world of conquest and absolute power, a girl is born named Khutulun, which means bright moon in Mongolian. But there's nothing soft or gentle about her destiny, because she's born to Genghis Khan, a direct descendant of Genghis Khan himself, with 14 brothers who should, by every tradition imaginable, inherit power, while she fades into the expected role of Mongol noblewomen, a political marriage to seal an alliance, a life in the shadows. But here's where the story gets interesting. Kaidu is not your typical father, and Khutulun is definitely not your typical daughter. From the moment she can walk, she's trained alongside her brothers, not as some token gesture or formality, but as a legitimate warrior. And the training is absolutely brutal. Mongol children learn to ride before they can properly run, shoot arrows from horseback at full gallop, survive on nothing but dried meat and mare's milk for weeks, because in this world, weakness equals death. And Khutulun, she doesn't just participate, she excels at all of it. By age 10, she's riding harder than boys twice her age. By 12, she's wrestling grown men to the ground. By 15, she's training with the elite warriors of her father's guard and winning consistently. But here's what sets her apart from everyone else. She doesn't just match the men, she absolutely surpasses them. And imagine this scene. A training ground outside Kaidu's camp, dozens of warriors practicing combat, and right in the center, a teenage girl is throwing seasoned soldiers into the dirt with techniques that leave them gasping for air and questioning their entire existence. Her brothers watch with this complicated mixture of pride and something else, something that might actually be fear, because they're starting to realize something that changes everything. Their sister might be the strongest warrior among them all. Now, strength alone wouldn't have made Khutulun legendary. What happened next would turn her into a figure so powerful that her enemies would literally tremble at hearing her name. And it all started with a decision that shocked the entire Mongol court and redefined what was possible. By the time Khutulun reaches adulthood, her reputation spreads across the steppes like wildfire. Stories told in camps from Mongolia to Persia about the princess who fights like a demon, the warrior who's never tasted defeat. And Genghis Khan watches his daughter with this growing mixture of admiration and concern, because the political situation is insanely complicated. The Mongol Empire, once united under Genghis Khan, has fractured into competing khanates. Kaidu himself is in near-constant conflict with Kublai Khan, who claims to be the great Khan of all Mongols. Alliances shift like sand, and marriages are weapons. Every daughter of a Khan is a potential treaty, a bargaining chip. And suitors start arriving at Kaidu's court, princes, generals, wealthy merchants, all seeking Khutulun's hand in marriage. She refuses, every single one. Her father presses her. You must marry. It's expected. You're a princess of the golden family. Your marriage could secure alliances we desperately need. And Khutulun makes a proposal that becomes absolutely legendary. I will marry,
but only to a man who can defeat me in wrestling, and every man who challenges me and loses must pay me 10 horses. The court falls into stunned silence, because wrestling is sacred to the Mongols. It's a test of strength, skill, and honor, and Khutulun is proposing to use it as a marriage contest that puts her on equal footing with any man in the empire. Some call it arrogance, others call it insanity, but Kaidu, after this long, tense moment, actually smiles and says, "Very well, let the challenges begin." The first challenger arrives within weeks, a prince from a neighboring territory, confident and strong, bringing his 10 horses as the wager. The entire camp gathers to watch, and the match lasts less than 2 minutes. Khutulun moves like lightning, feints, grabs, twists, and before the prince even understands what's happening, he's face down in the dirt with his arm wrenched behind his back. The crowd absolutely erupts. Khutulun stands there barely breathing hard and claims her 10 horses like it's just another Tuesday. The second challenger comes, then a third, then 100th. Some are skilled wrestlers, some are powerful men who believe raw strength will overcome her technique. Some are clever fighters who've studied her previous matches looking for weaknesses. None of it matters one bit. Khutulun defeats them all, and the collection of horses grows. 10 becomes 100, 100 becomes 1,000, and according to Marco Polo, who documented her story, she eventually accumulated over 10,000 horses from defeated suitors. 10,000 horses! But here's what the legend doesn't always tell you. These weren't just victories for pride or entertainment. These were statements. Every single time Khutulun stepped onto that wrestling ground, she was declaring to the entire Mongol world that she was not property to be traded, not a pawn in political games. She was a warrior, an equal, and she would choose her own fate on her own terms. The matches become major events where people travel for weeks just to witness them. Bets are placed, stories are told around campfires, and with each victory, Khutulun's legend grows until one match stands above all others. A champion arrives from a distant khanate, a man who's never lost a wrestling match in his entire life, and he brings not 10 horses, but 100 horses, a fortune that shows his absolute confidence. And he makes Khutulun a promise that's about to change everything. His name is never recorded in most histories. Some sources call him the champion of champions. Others simply refer to him as the one who almost won. But what we know is terrifying. He's massive, taller than most Mongols, with shoulders like a bull and hands that could crush stone. He's defeated over 500 opponents in sanctioned matches, trained in traditional Mongolian wrestling, plus Persian and Chinese techniques. And he is, by every possible measure, the most formidable opponent Khutulun has ever faced. And he knows it. When he arrives at Kaidu's camp, he doesn't just bring 100 horses. He brings his entire retinue, servants, guards, banners displaying all his victories, making this massive spectacle to ensure everyone knows this isn't just another challenger. This is the man who will finally defeat the undefeatable princess. The challenge is accepted, the date is set, and for the first time in years, people actually begin to wonder, could this be the match where Khutulun finally loses? Even Kaidu shows concern and speaks with his daughter privately. You don't have to accept this challenge. This man is different. He's a professional wrestler trained since childhood. There's no shame in refusing. Khutulun looks at her father with those piercing eyes that have seen 100 victories and says, "If I refuse now, everything I've built means nothing. Every victory becomes hollow. Every man I've defeated can claim I only won because I chose my opponents carefully." She pauses, and her next words carry absolute steel. "I will fight him, and I will win." The day of the match arrives, and the entire camp empties out to watch, because this isn't just entertainment anymore. This is history being made one way or another. The champion enters the ring first, performs the traditional eagle dance ritual that begins every Mongol wrestling match, his movements powerful and confident, because he's performed this dance hundreds of times before victory. Then Khutulun enters, and the crowd goes completely silent. She wears the traditional wrestling outfit, small vest exposing chest and back, heavy boots, shorts, the same outfit every wrestler wears, man or woman, but on her it carries different weight, because she's not just a wrestler, she's a symbol of everything people thought was impossible. The eagle dance begins, and she mirrors his movements, but where his are aggressive, hers are fluid. Where his demonstrate raw power, hers show precision. They circled each other, and then the match explodes into action. The champion lunges forward with terrifying speed for a man his size, hands reaching for Khutulun's vest, seeking the grip that's defeated so many opponents. But she's already moving, sliding to the side with grace that seems impossible. He adjusts, comes at her again, and this time he actually gets a grip and pulls, using his superior weight to drag her forward. The crowd gasps because no one has ever successfully pulled Khutulun off balance before. But here's the brilliant part. She doesn't resist the pull. She uses it. As he pulls her forward, she drops her weight, rotates, and suddenly his momentum is working against him. He stumbles for just a fraction of a second, he's off balance, and that's all she needs. Khutulun hooks her leg behind him, grabs his vest with both hands, pulls, and physics and leverage do the rest. The champion, all that size, all that strength, all that confidence, crashes to the ground like a felled tree, and the impact is so hard that dust explodes in a cloud around them. For a moment, nobody breathes. Then Khutulun stands, extends her arms in the traditional victory pose, and the crowd erupts in cheers so loud they can probably be heard in the next territory. The champion lies on his back, staring at the sky, trying to understand how his undefeated record just got shattered in less than 30 seconds by a woman half his size. Khutulun claims her 100 horses, helps the champion to his feet, showing respect to a worthy opponent, and then does something that surprises everyone. She offers him a position in her father's army. "You are a skilled fighter. Your strength would be valuable in battle. Serve my father and you will have the honor you seek." Some see this as mercy. Others see it as a political masterstroke, because by converting her defeated opponents into allies, Khutulun isn't just building a legend, she's building an actual power base. The champion accepts, and Khutulun walks away from the wrestling ground, knowing that she's just proven something undeniable. She's not just the equal of any man in the empire. She might actually be superior to all of them. But here's the thing. Being the greatest wrestler in the Mongol Empire was just the beginning of her story, because what Khutulun did next would take her from legend to something even more incredible, proving that her skills on the wrestling ground were absolutely nothing compared to her genius on the battlefield.
The wrestling matches made Khutulun famous across the steppes, but what she did on the battlefield, that made her immortal. By 1275, the political situation in Central Asia has reached an absolute breaking point. Kublai Khan, ruling from his capital in China, claims authority over all Mongol territories, while Kaidu, Khutulun's father, refuses to acknowledge this claim because he sees Kublai as corrupted by Chinese culture, abandoning the true Mongol way of life. War becomes inevitable. And when Kaidu assembles his army for the conflict, he makes a decision that shocks his generals to their core. He appoints Khutulun as one of his commanders. Not a figurehead, not some symbolic position to make a political point. A real military commander with tactical authority over thousands of warriors, with the power to make life and death decisions in the heat of battle. Some of the older generals immediately protest. She is a woman. The men will not follow her into battle. Kaidu's response is devastatingly simple. Watch them. And here's where Khutulun's story shifts from impressive to absolutely jaw-dropping,
because her first real test comes during a skirmish near the Talas River, where Kaidu's forces are engaged with a detachment of Kubla's army. The battle is complete chaos, cavalry charges, arrow volleys, hand-to-hand combat in the dust and blood. And Khutulun rides with a contingent of 300 horsemen with a clear mission: flank the enemy position and create chaos in their rear lines. But as they circle around, they discover a massive problem. The enemy has positioned a reserve force exactly where Khutulun planned to attack, and if she proceeds with the original plan, her 300 riders will be slaughtered by a force 3 times their size. Now, in that moment, with arrows flying and men dying all around her, Khutulun makes a decision that reveals her tactical genius. Instead of retreating or forcing a suicidal attack, she splits her force. 200 riders continue the flanking maneuver, making as much noise as possible, creating the perfect illusion of a major attack. The enemy reserve moves to intercept them, thinking they're stopping the main threat, and Khutulun, with her remaining 100 riders, circles even wider, moving faster, staying out of sight behind a ridgeline. By the time the enemy realizes what's actually happening, Khutulun has positioned her force directly behind their command position, and she leads the charge herself, screaming a Mongol war cry that literally freezes the blood of everyone who hears it. The attack is absolutely devastating. The enemy command structure collapses, officers are cut down before they can organize any defense, and in the chaos, Khutulun does something that becomes her signature move on the battlefield, something that seems physically impossible. She rides directly at an enemy officer, a general based on his armor and banners, and he's surrounded by bodyguards, but she doesn't care one bit. She charges through them like they're made of paper, and then, in this move that defies belief, she leans from her saddle, grabs the general by his armor, and literally pulls him off his horse while riding at full speed. She holds him against her side like a sack of grain and rides out of the enemy formation, carrying him as a prisoner while arrows fly around her. The enemy forces see their general, captured by a single warrior. In this impossible feat of strength and horsemanship, morale completely shatters and the battle turns into a rout. Khutulun returns to her father's camp with the captured general, and when she throws him at Kaidu's feet, the entire army witnesses it. And from that moment forward, absolutely no one questions whether men will follow her into battle. They will, because she wins. And she wins spectacularly. This becomes her pattern over the next 15 years. Khutulun participates in dozens of major battles, commands forces ranging from hundreds to tens of thousands, and develops a reputation not just for raw strength, but for intelligence in warfare that rivals any general in the empire. She studies her enemies obsessively, adapts tactics on the fly, understands that Mongol warfare isn't just about charging and overwhelming opponents with force, it's about mobility, deception, psychological warfare, and she excels at absolutely all of it. According to historical accounts, Khutulun personally captured enemy warriors in combat on multiple occasions, and the technique of grabbing an opponent from horseback while riding at full gallop becomes associated specifically with her. Enemy soldiers begin to genuinely fear the sight of a woman warrior charging toward them because they know that if she gets close enough, they're already defeated, already prisoners, already part of her growing legend. But here's what makes Khutulun truly exceptional beyond just her combat prowess. She doesn't just fight for glory or conquest, she protects her people with fierce loyalty. In one recorded incident that shows her character, a portion of Kaidu's army is ambushed during a retreat, and the rear guard is being cut to pieces by pursuing enemy cavalry. The situation is absolutely desperate. Men are dying by the dozens, and the entire army could be destroyed if the pursuit isn't stopped immediately. Khutulun doesn't wait for orders from her father or senior commanders. She assembles every available horseman she can find, approximately 2,000 riders, and leads a countercharge directly into the pursuing force. The enemy expects a desperate, disorganized attack from a panicked force, but what they get instead is a perfectly executed cavalry assault that hits them like a warhammer. Khutulun's force punches clean through their formation, wheels around with precision, and attacks again from the opposite direction before they can recover. The enemy army breaks and scatters in complete disarray, the rearguard is saved, and Khutulun cements her reputation not just as a warrior, but as a leader who will risk absolutely everything for her soldiers. Her troops begin to call her the princess who fights like 10 men, but those who actually serve under her command have a different name, one spoken with deep respect and loyalty. They call her the Shield of the People. But all this military success, all these victories and legendary exploits, created a problem that Khutulun never anticipated. Her power was growing so vast, her legend becoming so large, that it began to threaten the very family she fought to protect. And the conflict that emerged would force her to make an impossible choice that would define the rest of her life.
The wrestling matches made Khutulun famous across the steppes, but what she did on the battlefield? That made her immortal. By 1275, the political situation in Central Asia has reached an absolute breaking point. Kublai Khan, ruling from his capital in China, claims authority over all Mongol territories, while Kayadu, Khutulun's father, refuses to acknowledge this claim because he sees Kublai as corrupted by Chinese culture, abandoning the true Mongol way of life. War becomes inevitable. And when Kayadu assembles his army for the conflict, he makes a decision that shocks his generals to their core. He appoints Khutulun as one of his commanders, not a figurehead, not some symbolic position to make a political point, a real military commander with tactical authority over thousands of warriors, with the power to make life and death decisions in the heat of battle. Some of the older generals immediately protest, "She is a woman. The men will not follow her into battle." Kayadu's response is devastatingly simple. Watch them. And here's where Khutulun's story shifts from impressive to absolutely jaw-dropping, because her first real test comes during a skirmish near the Talas River, where Kayadu's forces are engaged with a detachment of Kublai's army. The battle is complete chaos. Cavalry charges, arrow volleys, hand-to-hand combat in the dust and blood, and Khutulun rides with a contingent of 300 horsemen with a clear mission: flank the enemy position and create chaos in their rear lines. But as they circle around, they discover a massive problem. The enemy has positioned a reserve force exactly where Khutulun planned to attack, and if she proceeds with the original plan, her 300 riders will be slaughtered by a force 3 times their size. Now in that moment, with arrows flying and men dying all around her, Khutulun makes a decision that reveals her tactical genius. Instead of retreating or forcing a suicidal attack, she splits her force. 200 riders continue the flanking maneuver, making as much noise as possible, creating the perfect illusion of a major attack. The enemy reserve moves to intercept them, thinking they're stopping the main threat. And Khutulun, with her remaining 100 riders, circles even wider, moving faster, staying out of sight behind a ridgeline. By the time the enemy realizes what's actually happening, Khutulun has positioned her force directly behind their command position, and she leads the charge herself, screaming a Mongol war cry that literally freezes the blood of everyone who hears it. The attack is absolutely devastating. The enemy command structure collapses, officers are cut down before they can organize any defense, and in the chaos, Khutulun does something that becomes her signature move on the battlefield, something that seems physically impossible. She rides directly at an enemy officer, a general based on his armor and banners, and he's surrounded by bodyguards, but she doesn't care one bit. She charges through them like they're made of paper, and then, in this move that defies belief, she leans from her saddle, grabs the general by his armor, and literally pulls him off his horse while riding at full speed. She holds him against her side like a sack of grain and rides out of the enemy formation, carrying him as a prisoner while arrows fly around her. The enemy forces see their general captured by a single warrior in this impossible feat of strength and horsemanship. Morale completely shatters, and the battle turns into a rout.
Khutulun returns to her father's camp with the captured general, and when she throws him at Kayadu's feet, the entire army witnesses it. And from that moment forward, absolutely no one questions whether men will follow her into battle. They will, because she wins, and she wins spectacularly. By 1290, Khutulun has become the most powerful of Kayadu's children, not because she's the eldest, not because of her gender, but because she earned it through 2 decades of unmatched military success. She commands armies, wins battles that others would lose, and most importantly, she has her father's absolute trust in all military matters. But Kayadu is growing old now, and the constant warfare against Kublai Khan has taken its toll on his body and spirit. He needs to think about succession, about who will lead his people after he's gone. And by tradition, by law, by every single expectation of Mongol culture, one of his 14 sons should be his heir. But Kayadu begins to consider something radical, something that would shatter centuries of tradition. What if Khutulun succeeded him instead? What if merit, not gender, determined who ruled? When whispers of this possibility begin to circulate through the court, the reaction is explosive and immediate. Khutulun's brothers are outraged. The eldest in particular sees his birthright being stolen by his sister. Advisors warn Kayadu that naming a female heir could fracture his entire power base. Allied Khans send messages questioning whether they would honor agreements made with a female ruler. The pressure on Kayadu is immense, crushing. And Khutulun watches all of this with growing concern because she understands something that others might miss. Her father's favor is becoming a poison that could destroy everything they've built. In private councils, Kayadu makes his preference crystal clear. Khutulun is worth any 10 of her brothers. She has proven her capability in every way that matters. Why should gender determine who leads when skill and merit could determine it instead? But his advisors push back hard. The Mongol Empire has never had a female Khan. The precedent would destabilize everything. Your allies would desert you. Your enemies would see weakness and attack immediately. It's a trap with absolutely no good solution. If Kayadu names Khutulun as his heir, he risks civil war among his own children and potential rebellion from his vassals. If he doesn't, he knows he's passing over the most qualified candidate simply because of tradition and societal expectations. And Khutulun finds herself in this impossible position where she loves her father, has fought beside him for 20 years, has bled for his cause, and won victories that preserved his power. But she's also watching what her success is doing to her family. Her brothers avoid her at gatherings, whispered conversations stop the moment she enters a room, and she can feel the resentment building like a storm about to break. One night, Khutulun approaches her father in private and says something that reveals the depth of her character. "You must choose one of my brothers as your heir." Kayadu looks at her with surprise and frustration. "None of them have your skills. None of them have earned what you have earned through blood and sacrifice." "That doesn't matter," Khutulun replies quietly. "If you name me heir, this family will tear itself apart. And when you die, there will be civil war. Everything we fought for will collapse into chaos." "So you would step aside?" Kayadu asks, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You would let lesser men take power simply to avoid conflict?" And here Khutulun says something absolutely profound. "I would preserve what we've built. I would protect our people. If that means I cannot rule, then I cannot rule. But I can still serve. I can still fight. I can still be the shield." It's a moment of stunning selflessness, where she's choosing family unity over personal ambition, choosing her people's welfare over her own legendary status and the power that she's more than earned. But Kayadu isn't ready to let it go that easily. "I will think on this. Perhaps there is another way forward." Months pass with the succession question remaining painfully unresolved, tension building in the court, and then something happens that changes everything. Kayadu becomes seriously ill. It's 1301. He's in his 70s, which is ancient by Mongol standards. Years of warfare and stress have worn his body down, and now he's finally giving out. As he lies dying, the succession crisis reaches its absolute peak with messengers rushing between camps, brothers positioning their supporters, and the entire Khanate holding its breath. And Khutulun makes a decision that shows her political genius. She gathers her brothers together, all 14 of them, and makes a proposal. Our father is dying. We can either fight each other for power, destroying everything he built and spilling our family's blood, or we can come together and choose a leader who can actually hold this Khanate together. She pauses, looking each of them in the eye. I propose we support our brother Horus. He is not the strongest warrior, he is not the greatest general, but he is wise, diplomatic, and fair. He can unite our family, and I will serve as his military commander, ensuring our armies remain strong and our enemies stay afraid. It's an absolute masterstroke of political strategy. By voluntarily stepping aside and proposing a compromise candidate, Khutulun diffuses the succession crisis before it can become a devastating civil war. Some brothers are suspicious of her motives, others are relieved, but ultimately they agree because the alternative is bloodshed. When Khaidu dies shortly after, Horus becomes Khan and Khutulun, as promised, becomes his primary military commander, giving up the throne she could have claimed through her achievements. But in doing so, she saves her father's legacy, preserves her family's power, and prevents the empire from tearing itself apart. But here's the twist that history almost forgot, the part of the story that gets overlooked. Khutulun's story doesn't end with her father's death and her stepping aside from power. What she did in the years that followed would prove something even more important. She never needed a throne to change the world.
The legend becomes immortal. After Khaidu's death, Khutulun faces renewed pressure from her family and the court, everyone telling her the same thing. You must marry. You have no heirs. You're aging. The time for wrestling contests and warrior games has passed. By now, Khutulun is in her 40s, has spent more than 20 years defying expectations and building a legend that spans continents, and her collection of horses from defeated wrestlers has become so vast it's an actual economic force in the region, making her independently wealthy. And she has never married, never submitted to any man's authority. But now, with her father gone and her position secure as military commander under her brother's rule, she makes an unexpected decision that shocks everyone. She chooses a husband. His name is uncertain in the historical records. Some sources suggest he might have been named Ghazan or Abtai, but what is absolutely certain is this. He is not a prince, not a great warrior, not a champion wrestler from some distant land. He is a relatively ordinary man from among her father's loyal soldiers, someone she trusts implicitly, someone who has served loyally for years, and someone who, crucially, will never try to control her or diminish her power. The court is absolutely scandalized because after all these years of refusing princes and champions, after accumulating this legendary collection of thousands of horses and defeating every man who challenged her, she chooses someone completely unexpected, someone without noble blood or great achievements. But this is vintage Khutulun. She makes decisions on her own terms always, and she's not going to let anyone dictate who she marries just because that's what tradition demands. The marriage is quiet, without the elaborate ceremony one would expect for a princess of her legendary status. And notably, Khutulun doesn't give up her military command, doesn't retreat into domestic life or the traditional role of a Mongol wife. She continues to lead armies, continues to ride into battle, continues to be the warrior she has always been. And her husband becomes something genuinely unusual in Mongol society, a man defined not by his own achievements, but by his wife's legend. And according to the limited records we have, he seems perfectly content with this arrangement, supporting her rather than competing with her. But there's this darker current running beneath this seemingly happy resolution, because whispers begin to circulate through the courts and camps, ugly rumors, dark accusations that reveal how threatened people were by her power. Some claim that Khutulun poisoned her father to prevent him from naming her brothers as heirs. Others suggest she killed several brothers in secret to maintain her power and influence. And still others accuse her of practicing witchcraft, claiming that her unnatural strength and unprecedented success must come from dark magic rather than skill and training. None of these accusations are ever proven, none are based on any credible evidence whatsoever, but they persist in the historical record, written down by chroniclers who can't quite accept that a woman could achieve what Khutulun achieved through pure skill, intelligence, and merit alone. This is the double-edged sword of her legacy. She is so exceptional, so far beyond what her society believes a woman can be, that people literally cannot believe she's real without supernatural explanations. They invent dark magic, they fabricate crimes, they create narratives that make sense to their worldview even when those narratives contradict all available evidence. But Khutulun ignores the rumors completely, because she has more important work to do. Under her brother Oris's rule, with Khutulun as military commander, the Khanate remains strong and prosperous. She continues to lead campaigns, continues to win battles, continues to be the shield that protects her people from enemies and invaders. The historical record becomes frustratingly unclear in her final years, with some sources suggesting she died in battle, falling in combat like a true warrior should, while others indicate she died of natural causes, surrounded by her family and the soldiers who loved her. The truth is lost to time, swallowed by the centuries. But what we know for certain is this. By the time of her death, Khutulun had served as a military commander for over 30 years, participated in dozens of major battles across Central Asia, personally captured enemy warriors in combat more times than anyone could count, accumulated a fortune in horses from defeated wrestling challengers that made her one of the wealthiest people in the region, influenced the succession of one of the most powerful khanates in the Mongol Empire, and she had done it all while being a woman in a world that insisted loudly and constantly that women couldn't do any of it. She proved them wrong so thoroughly, so completely, that they had to invent crimes and witchcraft to explain her existence. But here's where Khutulun's story takes its most intriguing turn, the part that shows how legends can echo through time. After her death, her legend doesn't fade into obscurity like so many others. Instead, it transforms and travels across centuries and continents in the most unexpected ways. In the 13th century, a Venetian traveler named Marco Polo journeys through the Mongol Empire, spending years in Kublai Khan's court documenting everything he sees, and when he returns to Europe, he writes his famous book, The Travels of Marco Polo. In this book, he tells the story of a warrior princess who defeats all challengers in wrestling, who rides into battle and captures enemy soldiers with her bare hands, performing feats that seem impossible. He calls her Ayajarn, possibly a corruption of Ayurug, one of Khutulun's other names, and European readers are fascinated and skeptical in equal measure. A woman warrior defeating men in combat, commanding armies, refusing to marry? Surely this is exaggeration, Oriental fantasy, the kind of exotic tale travelers tell to make their journeys seem more impressive. But the story persists, spreading through Europe, capturing imaginations, and then, in the 18th century, an Italian playwright named Carlo Gazzi writes a theatrical work called Turandot that tells the story of a Chinese princess who challenges suitors to answer riddles, executing those who fail. The princess's name, Turandot, is derived from Turandacht, meaning daughter of Turan, a direct reference to Central Asian origins, and the story is clearly inspired by Khutulun's wrestling challenges, though transformed through centuries of retelling across different cultures.